So, welcome to episode 6 of Careers and Coffee. My name's Lucy, and I'm joined by my wonderful co host, Charlotte Picker. So, each week, Charlotte and I meet for a virtual coffee and we talk all things career related. And we thought we'd turn that into a little bit of a LinkedIn Live series, inviting you along, talking all things career related topics. So, this week, Charlotte and I are going to be diving in to interviews. But before we do that, Charlotte, can I just check? Have you got your coffee?
Absolutely got my coffee,
Me
Lucy.
too.
Have you?
Cheers.
Cheers.
Yep. So tell us, Charlotte, interviews.
Mm. So, just finishing my coffee. So this week we wanted to finish on interviews because we've talked about basically preparing you to this point. You get that email that says, "We'd love to meet you. Come on in for an interview." And for me, interviews make some of the best stories and the most interesting things. I think you can learn a lot. So some of the things we want to talk about are great experiences that we've had from an interviewing perspective, but also conversely, as we've both been hiring managers, when it's not gone so well and why it's not gone so well. Also, there's a lot of talk at the moment, and I don't know if you've seen this, Lucy, but how many rounds of interview is too many rounds of interview? Because this is a hot topic.
Mm-hmm.
Also, how long is too long in an interview? Like, is 15 minutes enough? Because I've seen this, like 15-minute interviews. Is an hour too long? There's a whole debate going on around this. And then there's like a sub layer, right, which is around case studies, tests, values-based, cultural fit interviews, as well as competency. It's a minefield.
Mm-hmm.
So we're going to explore a bit around that as well. And then also top tips, always important. So I'm looking forward to hearing yours, Lucy. I'd be interested to know if we've got any similar ones or very wildly different ones. And then I guess like best and worst interview questions and answers, I think would be a good way to finish. So let's dive right in. So I quite often will do this, and for those of you that have been watching this over the past few weeks, I found somebody else has already been doing a poll, and the poll has been about how many interviews is too many interviews. He phrased it slightly differently to that, which let me find the exact wording so I'm not being misquoting of him. So he says in his poll, how many interviews does it take to get a solid sense of a candidate? And when I keep saying he, the person that has put this poll together is a chap called Alan Gorenstein. This poll has had, when I took a snapshot, 37,500 votes. So it's lots of people have voted on it.
Yeah.
So the options he gave was 1 round of interview, 2 to 4 rounds of interview, 5 to 7, or over 7. So before we go into the poll, Lucy, how many rounds of interviews do you think it takes to get a good sense of a candidate?
I think, not to be on the fence, I think it depends on the company and the role that you're going for. But if I was to give you a number, I'd say 3.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah.
I also, 3 was my gut instinct. So
Yeah.
when I answered the poll, I selected 2 to 4.
Yeah.
I think between 3 and 4, depending on, as you say, level of seniority and type of role. So just to give you an idea, 75% of people agree with us, which is good news.
Yeah, good news.
Interestingly, though, 17% said it only takes 1 round of interview. Very confident interviewers there, I feel. And then 5 to 7 and over 7 was equally tied at 4% each.
I don't know. The one, to me, as a hiring manager, when I've been in that situation, I feel like 1 isn't quite enough. I think it's quite good just to have like the initial, like 1-to-1, a 45 minutes, an hour max interview. And if that is the candidate you want, then like a 15-minute, 30-minute follow-up interview with the hiring manager is hiring manager's manager or somebody else within the team, I think is appropriate, because I think that 2 interviews at least will give you a good flavour of who that person is.
Yeah, I'm inclined to agree. And again, as I mentioned, there's been a lot of content about this on LinkedIn particularly. And there's been a couple of recruiters or headhunters that I've engaged with their posts on very similar topics, but then coming at it from their client's perspective. So don't forget, recruiters and headhunters work for a client, so whoever the hiring business is, and they're saying these hiring businesses are getting really annoyed where they really like a candidate, and then the candidate goes, actually, I've accepted another role because, frankly, the hiring process has taken so long. And so they're like, well, this isn't, this isn't cool. Well, I really like that candidate. And both Mark Thomas and Ben Watkins, who were both the posters, and I will share the posts attached to this, both are saying these hiring processes have taken so long that they've lost their great candidate and they've gone somewhere else. Now, I know that in talent acquisition internally, as a KPI, they measure things like time to hire. And I do think it's a valid KPI, because I don't know about you, but you don't want to go through months of like interview process only to find out that you haven't got the job. And why would you say no to another company that has a shorter lead time and is able to offer you within 2 weeks of a shorter interview process? Because to me that says a lack of decisiveness, and that for me is not a culture that I would want to go and work in. I don't know, what do you think?
Yeah, I agree. I think if I was the person, the candidate in this situation, whereby I was having to go through rounds and rounds of interviews and it was taking, months and months on end, if you want me, surely 3 interviews should be enough. You can also look at my LinkedIn profile, you can read my recommendations. We've talked about that throughout the last kind of 6 weeks, haven't we?
Yeah, absolutely.
I get why, the managers would be annoyed about it, but then I think you need to really, that's the risk you take. If you've got a long, as harsh as this sounds, but if you've got a long interview process, and that's what you follow, that's the risk that you're taking there. And decent, good candidates will be snapped up quickly.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, a hiring process is also a reflection of a business. And to my point, do I want to go and work in a business where they're so risk adverse and they've got such decision fatigue and it takes them months and months to hire one role? I mean, imagine if they're doing that same length of hiring process for multiple roles. For me, it tells you a lot about the culture and how the business operates. And I think it's a big turn off for candidates, particularly when lots of businesses and lots of people want to have the agility and flexibility and to be able to move quickly.
I'd be curious to hear from you guys in the audience. What's your view around how many interviews is enough? And actually, have you ever had an experience whereby there's been a long interview process and then you've ended up actually being offered another job and you've kind of detoured that way? Or have you taken a job after a long interview process? Or explain why there's such a long interview process? Because I'd be super curious to find that, to know.
Yeah, no, me too. I'm always interested to hear what different people's experiences are in this area, because there's no kind of cookie cutter. For me, having had to do various interviews more recently because of being made redundant last year, I've really got a sense of there is literally no one size fits all now. It just feels it really varies in terms of rounds and the amount of time they want to speak on the phone. So, for example, more sort of startup-y type businesses, I find are, let's have a quick 15 minutes first initial round.
Yeah.
15 minutes, I'm not sure is always long enough, but typically when I've done let's have an initial 15-minute chat when I've worked in one of those sort of startup scale up environments, I always block out 30 in my diary, because I don't want to cut the candidate off.
Yeah.
But I also want to make sure that they know it's just an informal chat to make sure that there's a good sort of fit there.
Yeah.
But then equally, like, I've also witnessed interviews where like, can you block out 2 hours of your diary? You're going to meet this person for 30 minutes, then you're going to go straight to meet this person for 30 minutes, and then this person for 30 minutes. Why not make that a panel interview? Why not have everybody together?
Yeah.
It feels like it's just, I've said this before, building friction into the candidate process.
Yeah. Also, what I will say is that this experience that we're talking about is coming from like permanent side of
Mm,
working. When you're
yes.
contracting, it is slightly different. Normally, you'll have a 45-minute, an hour interview, if that, and it just, as long as you can do the job and your CV reads well, just from my own experience and just from feedback I've had from other kind of contractors, and when I've hired contractors myself, I've tend to just, had the one interview and then hired them, whether I hired them or not,
Yeah.
straight away, and that's been enough. It's when you're going in for those more permanent roles, you have a little bit more of a rigorous process, I'd say.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. I'd completely not thought about that. I remember I've hired a number of contractors in my career, and you're right. It's interesting how we'll make that quicker or snap decision, having that one maybe like 30-minute, 45-minute interview, and maybe introduce them to like a stakeholder or something and do like a 30-minute chat with them. But
Mm.
it's never more than that. It's a much quicker, well, I guess it's more transactionary. Is that a word? Transactional. That's the word I was looking
Transactional,
for. Not
yeah.
enough coffee yet. Um, so it's interesting for sure.
Yeah, and I also will say as well, is that I think for the level of roles, maybe a little bit different for you, but for me, at that kind of middle management layer that I'm at, I definitely like an initial call with the hiring manager, then maybe like a presentation type thing,
Mm,
or like another kind of panel style interview, and then like a follow up, like 15-20 minute call with like the directors, I think is about right for the
I
types of
agree.
roles that I would go for. But I probably would equally say if you were going for a head of plus, I would probably expect something a little bit similar. Something maybe a little bit more. I don't know, Charlotte. It'd be great to hear your view for the roles that you've
So
gone for.
yeah, so I'd say with kind of head of director level, VP type roles, my experience, and again, love to hear from the audience on this one, but my experience has been anything from 3 to 5
Mm,
in terms of rounds, because it almost always starts off with the internal talent person,
yeah,
um, or obviously recruitment agency. So in including that, I'd say then there's at least another 4, and it's a mixture of with the hiring manager, um, then with like stakeholders you work very closely with, but you might have a panel for that. You might also have a separate one for that.
mm,
Um, it's been a combination of in-person ones now as well, um, and virtual, and then also case study. But I also, as a hiring manager, I like a case study round because I think it tells you a lot about how that person thinks and how they operate,
totally.
which I really like. And I also love to see somebody, really kind of sort of sparkle and relax a little bit more, because it gives them an opportunity to shine, to showcase what they can do. It gives that action side of things rather than just people describing and words and oh to resolve conflict management I once did this, like to answer competency based questions. I think it's I find them really useful. Anyway, I'm waffling a bit now, but um that's usually some sort of case study or something, to kind of test that thinking, that real world.
Yeah.
I also did a role play of actually doing the job
Okay.
as a with the CEO. Um, that was
Oh,
interesting.
yeah.
That is, you've got to be quick on your feet.
Yeah, what a great kind of, seeing how that character is under pressure almost.
But also gives you a good sense, as the interviewee or as a candidate, what that person that you're going to work for or work with very closely is really like.
Yeah, very
Because
true.
I think as an interviewer, you're always that bit more polished.
Definitely.
So, and I kind of, that brings me on to the fact that if there's one thing everybody takes away from this, it's remember that just because you've been invited to an interview by a company does not mean that you're not interviewing them too. It's got to be right for everybody.
Agreed.
I've walked away from roles and interview processes that I just like, no,
Yeah,
various red flags, or it's just not right for me, or mutually we decided that it's not right for whatever reason.
yeah.
There is zero shame in doing that, and it's really important, particularly I think more so now than them before, but culture is so important, and making sure you get that right fit. And as
Definitely.
somebody who's had lots of redundancy in a short period of time and lots of short start pieces of work over the past couple of years, for me, what I was looking for in my kind of next role is that sort of stability and that that real, I want to stay somewhere for a while.
Yeah,
And that, for me, I felt like I was interviewing them as much as they
definitely.
were interviewing me. And I think it's important, no matter what your level, you've got to make sure it's right, because once you're in it, it's so much harder to leave.
Yep, I completely agree. There's something that you were just saying, and it's made me think of a bit of a call to action to hiring managers and
Mm,
recruitment teams, is to set your candidates up for success, is to let them know in a way what the interview structure is going to be like.
yes,
And I'm saying this from experience, from me being a hiring part of the hiring team, and what we didn't do, and it annoyed me at the time, but I was in a bit of a different position at the time as well, is that we didn't tell the candidate that we were going to bring up some data and ask them to explain trends and tell us what that was through. And the amount of times we did that, and you could see the look of shock on their faces, and two people, and I take my hat off to them, said, I wasn't expecting that you were going to ask me this. And I thought, good for you. And
hmm
I think if the shoe was on the other foot, I would want to know that, just so I wouldn't have that shock factor there.
I
That's
think
just my opinion. You might have
no,
something
I think
different.
you're absolutely right. I think it comes down to, for me, it comes down to learning styles and how
Mm,
people operate. So I always talk about, definitely as I've got older, I'm much more of a reflector. So I want to consume the information, think
mhm.
about it, then action. I'm not saying I want to think about it for days and weeks and not an end, because I've worked in fast-paced environments and you can't do that. But sometimes, like, I need a minute to just digest.
Yeah,
Um, and so if I know what's coming, then I'm having that preparedness,
yeah,
that will make me come across better in an interview personally.
mm,
I also think that it's unfair of a business, because you're putting a candidate at a complete disadvantage
agreed.
by not telling them that this is going to happen.
Mhm.
Like, for example, you mentioned the data piece. It reminded me, I've also had an interview where they sent me some data to look at. I had 24 hours, look at it, identify some trends, make some recommendations. I really enjoyed it, but I was also really prepared for it. If I
Yeah,
was asked to do it on the spot with somebody watching me, that's probably not going to show me in my best light,
yeah,
because I like to be able to, because my working style when I'm doing something that's analytical is I like to be able to concentrate, think about it, notes everywhere, like explore, reflect, all of that stuff. And I think that
yeah.
that's why I wouldn't do that, but I don't know.
Yeah, I also kind of, my view on it still is that if someone had sent it to me 24 hours before, or if we had done that 24 hours before, at least
Mm,
we've set them up for a kind of, at least an element of success.
yeah,
Whereas every business has a different tool, and sometimes you're lucky enough that they use the same tool. And not
exactly.
everybody is familiar with things like MicroStrategy, which is a tool that I used to
Oh,
use,
yeah.
and yeah, which we've talked about at length. Poor Charlotte's had moments where I've been on the phone to her, like, "I can't use MicroStrategy, help me." Um,
Well, also not a fan. It wouldn't be my first choice to know MicroStrategy.
yeah. Anyway, but just kind of really echoing what you're saying, really, I think, again, a call to action to kind of companies, please consider that when you're interviewing people.
I think the only thing I would say is there may be a reason that they're interviewing that way and that they're putting somebody on the spot. And it might be because they're wanting to test how somebody can work under pressure
Yeah,
or with very little notice. And it's not about getting the right answer, but it's how they respond to that.
yeah,
And that might be particularly important for that role. So that's the only thing I would say that sort of is taking that into consideration more. But generally, I'm with
totally
you. I
agree.
think
I totally agree with
notice is
you.
key.
And I can also confirm that wasn't the purpose of that interview question that we asked. But anyway, we shall move on from
Oh, I look forward to finding off more details behind this, Lucy.
yeah.
Um, so, whilst we're on this topic, thinking about interviews, so more generally, when we think about interviews, people are thinking about competency-based
Mm,
questions, the more traditional type of interview. So, Lucy, as a hiring manager or as a candidate, or you might have one for both, do you have any stories you might want to share about where an interview has gone not so well?
Yeah. I've got one from my own opinion, from my own kind of experience, and
Yeah.
one as a hiring manager. So the one from my own experience was I was interviewing with a brand and a company that I was so desperate to work for. I loved what they were doing. I loved that it was tech. It was like fash tech. Oh, ticked all my boxes. And the hiring manager was so fixated on my degree and asked me loads of questions. And this was only last year, and I graduated in
I vaguely
2011.
remember you telling me about this.
Yeah, and the questions was just constant. Oh, what did you study for your degree? What did you do a dissertation on? What? And I was a bit like, and how I handled it, because at the time I was feeling a bit like, why are you asking me this about my degree? And I realized the reason why she was asking me this question was because, upon reflection, by the way, was because she wanted somebody more technical in this role, and I totally get that. But
Hmm.
instead of asking me a question around like, what's my skill set? Do I have technical skills? When was the last time I did something like C++ or Java? Which, just so you know, I did that as part of my degree. I sucked at it completely. And how I answered the questions that she was asking me about, because she was really, really deep diving into it, I then said it was such a long time ago that my skill set has vastly changed since my degree. I've got
Hmm.
managerial experience, service delivery management, and I turned it round to obviously put myself in a more positive light, shining light more on my strengths.
Yeah.
But I obviously, by the way, didn't get the job or offered the job because there was someone technical in that role. But that's for me is when it things like that could go wrong, and I think it's actually okay for you to have those moments when it does go wrong, and as long as you can switch it around almost to say, well, I can't do that, but these are my strengths, and if this is what you're
Hmm.
looking for, this is what I can offer. What about you? Do you have an experience?
Well, I want to kind of go back to your
Oh,
experience
sure.
really,
Yeah.
because similarly, I have been asked about my degree. Now, I don't know about you. Well, I do know about you. We've both got about roughly 15 years of work experience. So I would never expect 15 years after my degree to be asked about my degree.
Yeah. Yeah,
Like, frankly,
agree.
it's so long ago. I have the transferable skills. I still have some of the interest in it. But similar sort of story to you, although this was an internal job application process. The hiring manager, I'll never forget it because when you're applying for a job internally, it's very different to
Yeah.
um, external because these people, right? And I felt like the interview gone really well, and then I remember him saying, "So, you did international business. What did you do your dissertation in?" And I was like, and I remember sort of
Yeah.
sitting back, and I'm looking at the HR manager who's also there was like a good friend of mine, and him thinking, why is he asking me this? And so I answered the question, and then he's like, and so what were the key takeaways? At this point, I had probably had graduated eight, maybe 8 years prior to that. So I was completely unprepared for it.
Mm,
And, I don't even think about my degree when I'm going into an interview anymore. And maybe that's the wrong thing to do, but I think it's maybe because of how I hire as a hiring manager. Like, great that you've got this education, and with a degree comes a certain set of transferable skills. You can go research, do some discovery, write in a business context, know how to
mm,
write in third person, first person as well, all of that stuff.
yeah.
You can put a presentation together. Fine.
Great.
But I don't, for me personally as hiring manager, don't place huge importance on education. I place importance on learning professionally. So we talked about this before, I have high curiosity profile, I'm always reading.
Yeah.
I've done some qualifications. I'm more interested in that. I'm also more interested in your experience and what you can bring from that perspective. So
Mm,
for me, whenever I'm asked about education, I'm always like, oh, this is a bit old fashioned, because for me, I just
mm.
don't think it's as important, because the generation we're from, without besmirching our degrees, everybody went to university. It
Yeah.
was just a given.
Yeah.
People went and did degrees in basket weaving and David Beckhamology, if I remember correctly.
Yeah. 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 No.
So I just, being asked about that, I just think is,
Yeah. And I was just thinking as you're talking that through, and just upon reflection with it now, if I was ever in that situation again and somebody was asking me about my degree and knowing what I know now, even though my interview thing was last year, I probably would ask the question back to say, I'm really curious to understand why you're so curious about my degree. Is there something within my work experience that I could answer from?
yeah,
And I would probably turn it back around on them, because it's a bit like, Charlotte, what you were saying at the beginning. You're interviewing them as much as they're interviewing you. So
yeah,
they
absolutely.
clearly want to try and get, e.g., with my situation, they wanted to kind of get out of how technical I am. I'm saying that
Mm.
I'm technical enough to be dangerous. Um, and
I love that.
so that would be, so I think if anyone else is ever in that situation, I'll be also very curious as well whether you've ever been in one of these situations like
Mm.
Charlotte and I here. But if you're ever in that situation, I think that's what I would recommend. What I would do personally myself is to turn it back around and turn it into a bit of a question. Happy to answer, but I'm just curious to why you're so curious about that.
I think I'd also do the same now, because obviously
Yeah.
I also was unprepared for that. But I
Yeah.
think, in my case, it was more like, I hate to say this because I like the guy, but it was a bit of intellectual snobbery.
Oh, fair enough.
And I think that some people place a lot too much on the value of something like a degree.
Yeah.
You see it in job adverts, must have masters or MBA, or anything that's like above degree related. And I've met over the years, I've met some incredibly intelligent people who've got A levels or GCSEs, or and the entrepreneurial generation that
Yeah.
either millennials and Gen Z have turned out to be. Lots of them are school leavers that have founded these businesses, and to me that just shows that, I'm not saying that there shouldn't be any importance on the value of education, but it's not the most important thing.
Yeah, I definitely tend to agree more with that now, but then I equally know that some people who have gone and got their degrees have, e.g., a lawyer, totally need to go and get your degree for that.
Oh yeah, no, absolutely.
Like a
Doctors,
doctor, yeah, we 100% get that.
yeah.
And I always say this, and then we'll move on from this because we're going like,
We're going
this is a
down a very
whole
deep rabbit hole here.
different, yeah, this is a whole
Different
different
episode.
things in life. But if I had my time again, I probably wouldn't do my degree. But that's definitely a whole nother conversation.
Different conversation, but we should
Different,
definitely have the
yeah.
conversation.
So, Charlotte, from a hiring manager point of view,
Uh-huh.
have you ever had any moments where you've gone, "Oh, sherbet lemons,
Uh-huh.
this is not going too
I'm
well
looking.
right now."
Spoiler, I'm looking at a list of them. Like, where do I start?
Oh,
It's just
fabulous.
terrible, because the majority of people that you interview, right, you are good or are okay.
Yeah.
There are those ones. The most memorable ones are the terrible ones that stand out in my mind. I'm going to try and do this as succinctly as possible without it going into a big long story. So, first one, it's what I call the hand cream story. So, this is an in-person interview. Lucy's like, this is an in-person interview, and it was the days of working in an office full time. And I remember getting a telephone call from the receptionist to say, "Charlotte, your person's here, da, 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 for your interview." And I was like, "Okay, I'll be down in 2 minutes." Like, literally, my desk was right by the door that went down the stairs to collect the person. And I heard Dot, the receptionist, say to this woman, "She's going to be down in 2 minutes." Oh, so I'm literally down in 2 minutes. As I'm down in 2 minutes, she's like, kind of doing this with her hands. And so sort of like rubbing her hands as if she's put lotion on them. And you're in work mode, so you hadn't really thought about it. And I remember going out to shake her hand, and I was like, "Hi, I'm Charlotte." And she says, "Hi, I can't actually remember the name of the lady now, so they're really going to bug me." And as I'm shaking her hand, I realised that it's sticky and wet. Sorry, I've just put, and she's shaking my hand still. She's going, "I've just put hand lotion on." I'm like, "Oh, lovely." And just this waft of lavender cream. And I was like, okay. And then we went upstairs. So the moral of that story is, don't put hand cream on before you're about to shake somebody's hand before going into an interview. That wasn't the reason that I didn't offer her the job, by the way, but that's the memorable part of that story. That's the first one. The second one, I always ask this question. So anybody who's ever been interviewed by me, I'm almost 100% certain like that everyone I've asked this question to. So my question is, so if I was to ask your friends and family to describe you in 3 words, what would you say? And it's a great question because some people are like, and other people are like, oh, well, they would say these things. Because I'm obviously not really asking what their friends and family will say. I'm looking for them to kind of describe themselves outside of, outside of being like, oh, I'm organised, I'm punctual, I'm attention to detail, like rather than asking them what their strengths are directly. So this was one person. So I asked the question, and bear in mind, this is an in-person interview. This was years ago. So I asked them the question, and they say, my friends and family would say I'm a feeder. I was like, sorry, what? This is obviously taking a bit of a turn now. So I was like, what do you mean? And she's like, oh, well, I like to cook. And I was like, oh, okay. Thank you for the clarification. But also, aside from the answer that she gave me, that was not the point of the question, but always sticks out of my mind because of her choice of word that she used.
That takes you off guard, doesn't it? Because you're just a bit like, you're probably expecting, like, oh, my friends would say I'm very loyal, or whatever.
Or I'm fun, or I like to
curious,
those sorts of things. But feeder,
I'm a
so
feeder.
that was the other one that sort of stuck out in my mind. Again, that person didn't get offered the job, but that was not because of that answer. One of the worst things I've ever seen, again, this is an in-person interview, is I was interviewing with my then boss, who was a man, and this person would be reporting into me. And this woman came in, and not only did she have the strongest perfume on, like it made your eyes water, like she bathed in it. Gosh. Which is fine, like that's not a reason not to hire somebody, but it was like the whole time, even when I'm asking questions, she only talked to him. And did kind of a bit of a hair twirl thing, and like it was very off-putting. And for me, she just demonstrated the fact that she wouldn't be respectful to me, and she was only really interested in him, and like it was just it wasn't great. And then I've got one more. Gosh. Actually, I've got 2 more. Then I had somebody once who realised that the interview wasn't going very well, decided to turn it on its head and try to pitch me his business, and asked me how he could get hold of the sales leader at the company that I was working at, because he would also like to have a conversation.
Oh, shut the front door.
Nope, I will not. And then the one that breaks my heart, the one that I guess I'd call this the one that got away. I'd had a great first interview with this guy, and the next round was with me and my boss, where they would do like a case study. So I send them a question, and some context to the business and what I was looking for, and they had 24 hours to turn it around, I think, or 40 hours. I can't remember. Maybe I was being nice at 40 hours. So he comes to the interview, and bear in mind, this chap was actually a recommendation from somebody else that was already in my team, and they'd worked with this person before. So I thought, okay, he misunderstood the case study, and that's fine. When I told him that he'd misunderstood, and I said, what we're really looking for is this. I appreciate you haven't got any slides for that, but maybe now you know this context, what would you do differently about what you've just described? He like clammed up. I said, oh, I don't know, and panicked. And I said, okay, don't worry about it. I was like, I haven't got any other questions for you. Is there anything you'd like to ask us? He said, no, I haven't got any questions. And then he hung up. Like literally hung up. And me and my boss at the time were just like, has that just happened? because obviously, this is why I call it the one that got away, because he was so embarrassed that he got it wrong, and he also knew obviously he was a recommendation from somebody else in my team. I just felt so sorry for him because
Yeah.
it didn't need to end like that, and I was trying to help him, but that's not the right thing to do, to put down the phone on
No.
somebody who's your hiring manager. Anyway, those are just like five that I can think of off the top of my head. I'm sure there's loads of others.
Yeah. I'm trying to think. There's a couple I'm not gonna give you because you've given some really great ones there. I think the only one that I've got more than one, but the one I want to talk about is when somebody came for an interview for a service design transition role,
Mm-hmm.
and they hadn't done that role before, and they completely misunderstood what service design transition does, and the answers they were giving weren't aligning with what service line transition would do. So I
Yeah,
would, me being me, I would be like, oh, well, what about this? I was like, well, in service line transition, this is what we would do. So, I was almost giving the answers to
yeah,
try and see if it would, but the answers were too kind of, and when I mean it, they were like, one was left, one was right. Like they were just so far apart.
mm-hmm.
Um, and that for me, and I guess the moral of that story, because there's lots of stuff that you said there, like make sure you don't put when attending like a face-to-face interview, don't put hand cream on before you're going to shake someone's hand. Think about personal hygiene is really important, but don't put so much perfume on that you're going to like toxicate the poor the poor people that are interviewing you. Also, like think about respect around who you're going to be speaking to, all of those things. With this one, I think it's about understanding, what you've gone for in a
Mm-hmm.
way. And I know a lot of people, I think we talked about this before on the job application one, around people are just applying for stuff willy-nilly, and I totally get it in this market that we're in. But if you do get an interview, bloody research the job that you're about to go into before attending and get some good examples up that align with actually what the job does. IMO.
100%. 100%. So whilst you're out coming up with top tips there, Lucy, any
Yeah.
more you want to share on what is helpful and good to do for ahead of an interview?
Yeah, I think do your research on the company, do your research on the job that you're about to apply for. Um, okay, is it right to share a resource now? Do you want me to share my resource at the end?
Yeah,
I'll
go
share my
for it.
resource now. Um, James Reed, YU, it's 101 interview questions. I think they've had like a new edition now and there's more questions in it. One of the best books I've ever purchased as a candidate and as a hiring manager, because there is literally 101 plus interview questions and how to answer them with actual examples on how best to answer answer the questions. One of them would be, just kind of give you an example, is when the hiring manager asks you things like, tell me about your strengths, instead of going, oh, I'm good at da da da, you can say, well, actually, I've been told that and just the way you structure the
Yeah,
answer better. I really like it. So I'll make sure there's a link in the comments. Um, I also think it's really important to be in a good location when you're having your interview. Years ago, and I'm talking like when I first kind of started being hiring manager, so a long time ago, I interviewed somebody and he was at a train station and he couldn't hear me. I couldn't hear him. He also called me mate and he was a little bit, you could tell he wasn't really that fussed about the role.
if I had a red flag, I'd be
Oh
waving it
yeah,
right
red
now.
flag. And I ended that quite quickly to say, if you are interested in this role, maybe a better time would be suitable. Da, da, da. Just make sure. I know that's kind of an obvious thing, but I do know a lot of people who are having
Yeah.
interviews in coffee shops, or if you're going to go and have an interview, maybe there's like a library nearby where you can sit in like a quiet space and have like, try and find a good, quiet, safe space for you to have your interview that you can hear and they can hear you and see you if it's, virtual.
Yeah, I also actually adding on
Yeah.
to that, if it's a virtual interview, turn your camera on.
Yeah.
I have went to interview somebody and they didn't have a camera on.
Yeah.
Like, I know not everybody likes to look at themselves. I mean, I certainly don't relish it, but in an interview, you're there to represent yourself,
Yeah.
and not having a working camera or, you know, not switching it on at all, that's a big turn off for employers.
Yeah, no, I agree with you. Totally agree with that. There's been a few kind of moments where I've had moments where we've gone, oh, sorry, is your camera not working? We can't see you. And then they're like, oh, right, okay, and then turned it on. But when I was hiring in my previous job, we had that
Yeah.
twice. So it is a really common thing, and
The
I'm
only,
surprised at it,
the
considering the.
only,
Oh,
yeah.
sorry, Charlotte.
No, no, go. You go. I think there's a delay.
Go on, you go.
I was going to say the only thing I would say slightly differently is that if you've already had your camera on, you've met each other, and the connection's not so good, if you say I'm going to turn my camera off, that's fine, but
Yeah,
don't join an interview and then not put your camera on and be then asked to put your camera on. I think that was the point I was trying to make, and I probably didn't make it so well.
yeah, no, but I agree with you with that too, because you're right, connection is a bit kerfuffly sometimes as well.
Can't
Um,
control the internet.
can't control the internet, which I've learnt. Um, terribly learnt this. Um, I also think having your interview as well, and we've been saying this kind of throughout. Yes, you're going to be nervous. Yes, you're going to have moments, especially if it's like your dream company and you love the people who you've interviewed with so far and you may be at the final stage, etc. But do remember you're also interviewing them. So please do like come loaded with some questions to ask yourself, which we'll come on to.
Mm-hmm.
I won't say them just yet, but I've got a few. What about you, Charlotte? Any kind of more hints and tips?
I mean, you've covered a lot of them. One of the other ones I would say, and this might be controversial, but
Mm.
research your interviewer. If they give you their
Mm.
full name, it's usually because they want you to go and look them up to know kind of a bit about them. I mean, usually a good interviewer will introduce themselves anyway, but sometimes it's helpful to know a bit about them.
Yeah.
Um, because then you can think, oh, okay, so you might have mutual connections, or they might have shared interests. Like LinkedIn is there to be used, and I think it's a good idea. The only thing I would say is don't get too stalkery about it. By which I mean, I have had somebody look at my profile multiple times when preparing to have an interview with me, which is a bit, when you get the notification says they've looked like several million times, that's a bit
Mm.
weird.
Yeah.
But at least have a look once, maybe twice.
Yeah. I think that's fine.
Understand a bit about them, because I think that's okay, that's acceptable.
Yeah.
Also, if you know anybody that works there already, talk to them ahead of your interview. Find out, like what the culture's like,
Definitely.
what this person's like that's interviewing, or persons are like that are interviewing you. That bit of extra insight, intel can often help.
Mhm.
Um, I think you touched on this, but I would also say know your CV and what is
Yes.
on it, because by knowing it, I mean, before I go into an interview, certainly for a virtual interview, I will reread my CV, even though I know it because I've lived and breathed it and done it.
Yeah.
Sometimes you can get a bit nervous,
Yeah.
but also by just rereading it, it gives you examples to the top of your mind when you're thinking about competency questions.
Yeah.
So that's another one I would say. And then I know you said about asking lots of questions, but I'd go more specific. I'd say come up with several lists. So have a list which is around management and leadership if you're going for a management role. Leadership, I always ask questions around, and what's your leadership style? Because I
Yeah.
want to know whether I'm going to be able to work with this person, because not everyone's going to be your dream manager, right? Or your
Mhm.
dream leader. Um, Even finding out what the leadership team's leadership style, like, are they autocratic? Do they make decisions and it's top down, or is it bottom up in terms of those sorts of things? That's one bucket. Then another bucket I have is around the team. So either the team that you're working within or the team that you might be managing.
Yeah.
A bucket around culture,
Yes.
one that's specific to the role, and then one that's specific to the business or industry. I
Yeah.
guess that's how I try to bucket things up.
Oh, I literally do the same. Like,
Great mind.
just literally the same. A new interview I say new, an interview question which I've used recently, and someone has asked me this too. Is there anything from what I've said today that I haven't answered your question properly, or if there's any concerns, or is there anything else I can tell you? I really like that question.
Yes, also like that question as a hiring manager and as a candidate, because it helps.
Yeah.
But conversely, what I don't like as a hiring manager is somebody that says, can you give me some instant feedback on how this interview went?
Oh
I
no, I
don't
don't
like
like
that.
that. No, I wouldn't do
And the
that.
reason I don't like that is not because I don't want to answer it. It comes back to what I said earlier. I'm a reflector. I
Yeah,
like to process and have a think. I don't want to be put on the spot.
yeah,
So
yeah.
I struggle to answer that question as a interviewer. Even if they had the most amazing interview, I'm like, oh, I'm not prepared to share that at this moment in time. I
Yeah,
want to debrief with my colleague if I've been doing it as a panel interview or have a think.
yeah. I would avoid that question, and that's my opinion, and just from my own experience. And I
I
think
agree.
I just I wouldn't ask the question, and I equally wouldn't like to be asked that question too, because y- that's ask me if there's anything. Ask me if there's like any other concern, not
Yeah, I
concerns.
like
I
that.
like that, but don't ask me for instant feedback because I might be interviewing 5 other people, or
Yeah.
you might be my last one, and now I need to, yeah, I agree with you on that one.
I think just generally think about the best types of interviews. I know we've talked about the ones that haven't gone so well. When I think about the best interviews that either I've done myself or I've had when I've been interviewing somebody, is where the candidate asks loads of questions about you, the interviewer, the business, the role. They're enthusiastic, they're well prepared, and they're super engaged. That's literally the only thing I would say. Like I could give you hundreds of examples of these types of people who have done these types of interviews,
Yeah,
but they're obviously not quite as funny as the ones that didn't go so well. But I just think my like over overriding advice is, be yourself, come prepared, and interviewers like to talk about themselves. So when you flip it,
yeah,
one of my favorite questions that I ask, but I also like to be asked, and I think most interviewers like this, is why do you enjoy working here?
yeah, yeah.
Because it shows that you're interested in the company, but also in the interviewer.
Yeah, I agree. I also quite like questions like, what does success look like for this role? Um,
Love the metrics question, Lucy.
yeah, 30, 60, 90 days,
Yeah,
those types of both ways I quite like. Um, yeah, those types of questions. There was something else, but it's just gone out of my head. There was something else I was going to say about interviews that I quite like. 36, 90 days, don't know. Feel for me why my brain kind of picks up. Maybe I need more
not enough
coffee.
coffee,
Yeah.
clearly. I do love the 90-day question. I always try to be the person that asks that when I'm being interviewed because I don't
Mm,
necessarily want to be asked it the other way
yeah.
around. But I also a more recent interview question I had, which I really liked, was the person said to me, and this was like a mid-stage interview, so this wasn't like an early stage interview. He was like, "So, how would you describe the job in your own words?" I thought that was good because
Yeah.
some people might not have looked at that job description since they applied for it.
Yeah.
So I really like that sort of thing. But you can flip that around as the candidate and say, well,
Mm,
obviously I've seen the job description, but how would you describe the day to day of the role?
yeah.
And I
I've
think
never
that's. Oh, go on.
no,
You've
I
remembered.
I remembered one of the 2 things, and apologies. I'll tell you what has distracted me is that my neighbour has decided to do her lawn 8 a.m. lawn mowing.
Oh my gosh.
So sorry if you can hear that.
No.
Um, I'm telling someone else's story here, and I'm gonna tag him in around this story. His name's gone out my head at the moment as well, but when I remember, I'll tag him in.
You
He
really
was
need more
telling us
coffee.
I definitely need more coffee. He was telling a story about when he had interviewed somebody but didn't offer them the job. And then they then followed up with a message to say, "Thank you so much for the opportunity. Um, I was wondering whether it would be okay if you could give me some feedback. So when I do go for roles like this in the future, I know exactly what I need to do and then I can
Nice.
just be better." And so much so that worked that he then contacted her, said, "Here's some feedback, da 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 da. Would you like to come and try again and interview again?" And then they interviewed her, and then I think another role had come up, and then basically then offered her the job. So I think it's
That's
really
amazing.
important. I think there's a line with it too, by the way. I
Yes,
think there's definitely a line in how you
definitely.
deliver that message, and it has to be very kind of authentic, heartfelt. You know, I'm really trying to kind of crack into this field right now, whatever it is, because I've also equally have had messages from people when we've said no to them, unfortunately, where they've messaged me and they've asked me really difficult questions, and
And
it's made
pushy.
pushy on
Yeah.
LinkedIn, and I've actually ended up blocking a few people from it. Um, and it's been, kind of trying heart-wrenching, like, "I don't have any money," and I've had 2 of those.
Oh my
And I
God.
Yeah, and I had to go and then speak to the HR person to
Yeah.
kind of help with that because, that was on my personal LinkedIn. That's my personal space almost, isn't it? But, like, that I found really hard. So, yeah, don't
I
be that person.
so no, I really like that story because I am a big fan of a thank you follow up post interview, and on a couple of occasions where I've sent a follow up where I was almost certain I hadn't got the role for various reasons. Both these people that I then thanked and said anything else comes up, really interested, really enjoyed our conversation. Both
Mm,
of them came back to me, sent me personalized feedback, proceeded to connect with me on LinkedIn, was like, we'll keep an
great.
ear out, like engage with my posts. One of them, when I became available again, when I posted about being made redundant, she contacted me, said there
Great.
isn't a job available, but I'm scoping out some roles in my department. I'd love to talk to you again.
Yeah.
Now, it didn't work out because unfortunately they ended up having a hiring freeze. But I mean, it was incredible. And then the other lady, I follow, we're connected on LinkedIn and stuff, but she sent me a really decent length message, and essentially they'd
I love
reshaped the
that.
role to make it more technical.
Yeah.
And she's like, otherwise, I'd have hired you in a heartbeat. I really enjoyed our conversation. But then she's like, please, can we stay connected on LinkedIn? And, and I've, seen some of her posts. She's really interesting. Like, I definitely think if the opportunity came, I would want to go and work with
Yeah.
her.
Yeah.
Um, but both those examples, very similar. Um, you know, I do think there is something to sending a thank you note. And don't get me wrong, I don't do it all the time, and I probably should. But you're right about the whole pushy thing because some people I have similar to you, not on LinkedIn but via email, had some very pushy,
Yeah.
but why? I,
Yeah.
I meet all these requirements. I don't understand, and like there's only so much you can say and do as a hiring manager in terms of feedback, I think.
Yeah. And don't get me wrong, like Charlotte and I totally get it. Like we've been in situations ourselves where we've like
Yeah.
looked for roles and we've needed a new role or whatever situation that we've been in, and especially the climate that we're in at the
Mm,
moment. I do get it, but there's ways of asking for help. There's ways for asking for feedback. And definitely, if you're not too sure, maybe get a friend to read over your message first or a couple of people to read over it first, just to make sure. Because when we're in the
yeah.
situation, we are going to be like, we want to say why not me?
Yeah.
Get someone to read it first. It's going to maybe take, and forgive me for saying this, but take a bit of emotion out of it. Um,
Yeah. No, I think you're right.
yeah. The other thing I did remember as well, by the way, I've remembered everything now, is when you're prepping for your interview, and I've been saying this throughout the whole kind of series, is to not be afraid to like just Google questions like, what interview questions will a service delivery manager get asked, or what questions will a product manager be asked? Do Google those because you'll get like a load of questions, and then that will help you in your prep. Do you do that?
Or use AI.
Oh yeah, yeah. Or use AI. Oh
Is that,
yeah.
which is
I've
where I
not
thought
tried
you were
it.
going with this.
No, do you know what? I've not tried that. However, if I'm ever in that situation where I'm interviewing again, I shall be doing that.
Okay. Um, but that's just another tool. There's so many
There's
tools
so many.
available, and you're absolutely right. If you've never interviewed with, I don't know, a CTO before, like what questions should you ask one at the end? And like I'm using that as an example, but like a good question you might want to ask them is like, what's going to be the IT strategy for the next 5 years?
Oh, love that question.
You know,
Yeah,
um, which you might not necessarily have asked the hiring manager, who might be, I don't know, like the IT manager or head
Yeah.
of application support, because they might only be able to talk about their specific, whereas you're thinking more strategic and bigger picture for the
Yeah.
CTO. And I
Oh,
think lots of
love it.
people get a bit nervy when they're being interviewed by somebody who's a director or a VP or
Mhm.
a C-suite person. They're all just people at the end of the day with the
Yeah.
title. And but you
I
need to
love
think
that.
about the context of what sort of questions you want to ask.
Yeah, do you know what? Really, really love that question. I have asked that question in the past around how does my role and the objectives of my role feed into the wider organizational strategy?
Great
Like,
question, Lucy. I
love
love
yeah,
that.
and
Killer.
also I think it just goes to show one, I'm genuinely curious because I wanna know that I'm doing a role that's gonna feed into the
Hmm.
strategy and that, whatever. But I also think people quite like to be like, "Well, actually, this is why this role's so important," and then you can get a bit more of a flavour day to day what the role's about.
Yeah, totally agree. I think there are a couple of things that we haven't talked about when thinking
Go on.
about interviews. So we've really focused mainly on sort of your typical competency-based questions and those types of interviews. I've
Mm,
touched on case studies, role play, that type of
mhm.
thing. What are your thoughts about cultural fit and values rounds? Have you had any? Have you been to them?
No, but not that I'm aware of, not that anything's coming straight to mind right now, but I've done those quizzes, we talked about it last week about the job
Yeah,
application. I've done, like, what's the word? Psychometric, is that
yeah,
right? Those
psychometric testing.
psychometric testing, I've done those things, but in my interview, I have been asked value-based questions from, like, one of our values is passionate,
Yeah.
da 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 da.
So I've worked in for a couple of businesses that have like a values or culture fit round. I've also been interviewed and been put through to a culture fit values stroke round.
Mm,
And I guess the reason I bring it up is it still relevant to have a separate round? Because it kind of comes back to, and again, I'm going to be slightly controversial here, bias.
yeah.
And is it a way to introduce bias into the hiring process to say, oh, well, they fit because they match the rest of our culture, rather than hiring somebody who's, a bit different? So I
Mm.
don't know, they haven't got like, they come from a different industry, or they have different ideas, or, are a thought leader in a different space, or, I don't know, they don't necessarily answer the values based questions to the letter. Like, would you, I guess my question to you and to the broader audience is, would you not hire somebody if they didn't pass a values based interview or a culture fit based interview?
Um, I'm gonna say I would hire somebody even if they didn't fit some of the cultural based stuff. And the reason why I say stuff there is because sometimes you need a little different. And if everybody's the same, you're gonna just have the same outcome time and time again.
Yeah,
And I quite like it when I've been in a position where I've been able to hire certain staff. So there was somebody who I hired um years ago when I was working in one of the retailers. And he, even though it was service line transition and it was a contract role, but he'd been out for a while doing some stuff. And
mm,
although it's technically he didn't align with some of the that retailer's values, he had a different background and mindset, which added value to the role and actually added value to me as a hiring manager and made me think differently. Did you see I was trying not to say the name of the place there?
I did.
Um,
um,
but yeah,
so I like that approach, Lucy, that you took. And I think when you're an experienced interviewer, you can be more pragmatic like that. A
yeah.
lot of businesses are trying to get everybody involved in all levels of hiring now, particularly sort of more startup scale up businesses. So people who are not really experienced interviewers. Now, obviously, in order to be an experienced interviewer, you have to start somewhere, right?
Yeah.
But I do wonder, by putting that putting sort of much more junior people in that position to hire and make decisions based on that, whether they are just going to be looking at, oh, they've satisfied the matrix, rather than being pragmatic in the viewpoint that you raised there.
Mhm. Yeah, I don't know. I think it's because I've had the privilege of working in lots of different businesses too, with different cultures.
Yeah.
Um, and as we know, businesses and cultures are ever growing and ever changing, and your cultural values might be, I don't know, like passionate this year, but next year your business direction might be more around like sustainability, right?
Yeah.
So I think, again, that's just my view, and from my
It's
experience,
interesting.
I'm just talking from my own experience, really.
No, I agree, and I think it has to be an experience-based answer. I think it's interesting. The reason I bring it up is, again, seeing lots of thought leadership in this space. Is
Yeah,
it right to still do these cultural fit interviews? Do you want people to fit perfectly into your organization, or do you want to have some challenge to that status quo? And I don't think neither one of us have the answer, but I would love to know what our listeners think.
definitely. And also, this is completely another episode. Um, is around when you're interviewing and hiring too. I think it's also important to maybe think about, and I've done this, hire people who have gone from maybe being a head of role, but now they're doing a completely different role. So they're kind of taking a bit of a sideways,
Oh, a pivot.
like a squiggly career. I was going to
Yeah,
say step down, but
diagonal.
it's, yeah, like a little do do. I think that's I think don't be so, and this is really controversial what I'm about to say. Like, don't be so like in yourself to think, oh, I can't hire this person because they're gonna probably really help you and make you look good, and they're gonna learn new skills. And I just know from this is a completely different kind of episode almost, but I
Hmm.
just know from a friend of mine who recently has been interviewing, and then even in her interviews she's been asked questions like, this is a significant pay cut, you're taking like a 20 grand pay cut, um like, and basically really like drilling her about it. And I completely disagree with that, but actually, why don't you think of a better question to ask first of all, and actually you're going to get a lot from this person, because this
Hmm.
person is wanting to take that diagonal. And make sure, if that is you and you're that person that's taking that diagonal move, make sure you're saying your reasons why.
I think,
You might have a different view.
well, no, I do agree, but I also do have a slightly different view, which is that um, I think the person that wants to pivot and make that diagonal move, it's their responsibility to make it super clear that this is
Totally agree.
this is their choice, this is why they're doing it. Because the questioning that you get asked around, the pay cut, or this is a much more junior role than what you've had previously, or you don't have any direct reports of this, you know, typically what the business is looking for is this person going to get bored, and am I going to be hiring for this role again?
Yeah. Yeah. As I
And
was saying, what I was
but
saying just now, I was thinking that too, by the way.
but it's in the way that you as the hiring team question that. Number
Yeah.
one, like, I don't like the whole you're going to be paid 20 grand less type of approach
That's
to
wrong.
it. Like,
Mm.
money is irrelevant to this topic. I think it's about
Mm.
whether that person's going to be fulfilled.
Yeah.
So that, for me, the question would be, I see that you're very experienced in this. Obviously, you'd be moving to this role, which is either, not the same sort of seniority level, or, it's a different skill set, but and it won't have as much responsibility. Do you still think that you would be fulfilled in that role? I think that's the
Mm.
question,
Better
but I
question.
don't think that it's often asked in that way.
No, and I guess that's another call to action to hiring managers,
Yeah.
recruitment teams. Like, if you've got a question like that, don't be so. I'm probably saying this from a place of emotion, because it was from to a really good friend of mine, and it really upset her. So
Oh,
I'm coming from that point of view.
yeah.
Like, think about how that person's going to feel. So maybe like take Charlotte's lead there and ask better questions. Snap fingers, mic drop.
By which she means reframe your question in a different
Yeah.
way.
Thank you. Thank
Which
you
is literally
for
what I've just done to you
yeah,
now.
yeah.
Dropping
Thank
my
you.
mic now. Lucy, I'm conscious we've talked about so much. I love
We've
this
done loads.
subject. It's such an
Me too.
expansive topic. Is there anything else you want to discuss, share, any other resources?
No, we've hit an hour and 4 minutes. So what I'm gonna do
Whoa.
is, what Charlotte and I will both do is add some kind of resources, some
Yeah.
links for you to kind of dive in, have a look at. Also, please share your experiences too. Share your links too. Let's make this into if we can make this into a bit of a one-stop shop here,
Yeah.
all around interviews. put everything in, tag people in it, tag some of your favorite people that maybe talk about interviewing, job searching, etc. Tag them in here. Let's build like a really nice one-stop shop from this episode.
Yeah, I love that. So this is obviously the last episode of our first series of Careers and Coffee. Thank you so much for everybody who's joined. I know lots of you joined live with us week in, week out, but also we've had people join us after the episodes have gone on demand, and we really appreciate all the feedback and the engagement. So what we decided to do is we wanted to make these episodes available because it's obviously the summer, and we know that there'll be a whole tranche of people who have had to deal with childcare and have probably not been so active on their LinkedIn, or they've been on holiday, or been really busy because the summer is the peak in their business. So Lucy and I have created our very own YouTube channel called Careers and Coffee, where you will be able to find all 6 of our episodes. But not only that, you'll also be able to find another mini series, which is the spoiler. So earlier this year, Lucy and I pre-recorded a mini series called Tailoring Your Trajectory. You'll see it's earlier this year because I just come back from holiday and I'm much more tanned than I am now. But Tailoring Your Trajectory is a mini series that essentially is what it says on the tin. So we wanted to give you that bit of extra content. Feel free to engage with us on LinkedIn or on YouTube. We will share the YouTube channel in our upcoming posts. We really hope you enjoyed this, and hopefully later on this year or maybe early next year, we will be back with season 2. So on that note, I hope you've enjoyed our chatting about careers and you've drunk as much coffee as we have. Thank you so much.